Welcome. My name is Michael Connor. I'm Artistic Director of Rhizome, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to World on Wire Dialogues 2 with Mikhail, Maksimov and Tabor, Robak. This event is the second in a series of 3 online conversations. Will be followed by an event in Moscow later this fall that are being organized by Rhizome of the New Museum, a digital art organization that was founded in 1996 by artist Mark Tribe and has been an affiliate and residence at the New Museum of Contemporary Art in New York City since 2003, and Garage Digital, the platform of Garage Museum of Contemporary Art. I'm joined today by the artists, Mikhail Maksimov and Tabor Robak, and also my collaborator, Nikita Nechayev of Garage Digital, who you'll hear from in just a moment. Today's program, or this series, is structured so that it brings together artists from Rhizome's program and artists from the Garage Digital program, in particular with a focus on the Rhizome side, World on a Wire, which is the exhibition that Rhizome of the New Museum organized this year in partnership with Hyundai Motor. It premiered in Beijing at Hyundai Motorstudio Beijing and is currently on view at Hyundai Motorstudio Seoul and online at worldonawire.net. This fall, it will go to Hyundai Motorstudio Moscow. So this event is being held partly as a preview of that, and also as a kind of parallel to some garage programs that Nikita will tell you about in just a moment. World on a Wire draws its name from the film by Rainer Werner Fassbinder. It explores the possibilities and problems of artistic simulation from a range of different perspectives. And today's event will explore those themes in relation to 2 artists that draw both on kind of video game culture and art historical reference and work that often models and depicts nature and movement in different kinds of ways and systems. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nikita to say a few words about the Garage Digital program and about today's event.
Да, Майкл, спасибо большое. Я тоже рад всех.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm also happy to welcome everybody. I'm really happy that we have our participants joining us today. It's great to continue this small series of events that we're doing together with Rhizome. Let me present myself as well. My name is Nikita Nechayev. I'm a research curator of the Garage Digital program. It's a program organized by the Garage Museum of Contemporary Arts that supports artistic and research projects that interact with innovation technologies in different ways. Today, we will continue to talk about practices of various artists, discuss it with the artists themselves. These are artists that interact with simulations in different ways. We have Robak and we have Mikhail Maksimov with us tonight. And I'm going to start by passing the floor to Mikhail. Before I do that, I'll say that his works are currently on display at the exhibition Choosing Distance at the Garage Museum. It's going to run till the weekend. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, please do so. Not much time left. And the tool is also available on the Garage Digital platform. It's always available there. And to start off, we'll ask the artists to showcase some of their works from the projects that they're going to be talking about with a small commentary. And I'm going to pass the floor to Mikhail. Mikhail, hi. I'm incredibly happy to see and hear everyone, Tabor, Michael, Nikita. And as Nikita said in his intro, right, he mentioned Fatality, my work that's currently on display at Garage. I would like to start by telling you about the way I came about producing this work because it contains the prerequisites that got me to doing what I'm doing today. I edited a small video for you today of this work, about 5 minutes in total, to showcase the installation that you can check out at the Garage Museum. This is an excerpt. This is not the final work, but this is something that's indicative. You'll understand a bit more about its visuality. Maybe we can start with that and then we'll continue with that work.
Весь мир кажется ненастоящим и нереальным. Такое чувство, что
The world doesn't seem real. It feels so weird. It's not like you're dreaming, but it is at the same time. It's like you're not getting this feeling of reality. Everything seems unreal, plastic, weird, both inside and outside. And I just want to stare into one point. It's all so strange.
то я такая, так, я понятия не имею, что это, я понятия не
I
имею,
have no idea what it is. I have no idea who I am, what's happening with me. This is a very strange feeling. It's really frightening.
Последнее время я до того привыкла ритуалы делать, просыпалась в
I've gotten so
3.
used to rituals recently. At 4 a.m., I start to feel ecstatic, feeling both human and like an animal, like creatures that do everything the other way around. Beyond my consciousness, they live in the air around me. Beyond my consciousness, I cannot control them. All of my psyche is controlled by them. I'm no longer myself. I don't belong to myself anymore.
Родился на улице Герцена в гастрономе номер 22.
I was born in the gastronomy shop, a well-known economist, but I always wanted to be a librarian. I was a shop assistant, something that's necessary for the economy. It's a system of 120 units. A good manual is much more important than the gastronomy shop on the Harrison Street. And on the Harrison Street, you will find a discrete manual as it goes through gastronomy number 22 and be replaced in line with the formula for economic unity. It's Friday. Everything is changing every month. We're writing a new price. I was feeling okay, but feeling a bit stormy at the same time as usual. Well, I paid up, and then this man and woman, they enter by the front door. They open it themselves. So two walk into the house. They start a discussion. That's good. That's wonderful. That's not going to work.
Поток мыслей пронзает мне голову. Горячий поток.
Thoughts are piercing me. Thoughts dispersed. My psyche is ecstatic. One song replaced by another. Different men and women made of fire are captivating all of my thoughts, dictating me to poison myself. Food is smelling like dead people. They're taking my thoughts. They're placing the thoughts into my head. They told me that I'm a doll, that I need to drink some water. They poison the air around me so it doesn't smell.
Пространство предстает предо мной как какое-то расплывчатое, какое-то
This
туман.
piece is blurry. It gives a blurry feeling, and the air stops being transparent. It leads to everything seeming flat. Everything visible becomes photographic. Everything visible is like in the dark, like I exist in the dark. The reality irritates me. It is presented to me like from distance. I, the specific I, do not enter my historical existence. What emerges is diving deeper into my own being and existence. There are two eyes being present in me. One eye is white, the other is black. While the black one is winning over the white, I'm going to bed. My whole body is itching. The Russian sadness is being present to me. All of these pieces of coal all around my body suggest to me that I'm irritated, I'm sad, and I don't know why. Now, I guess I should make a couple of comments. I would like to explain the origins of this work. So first of all, I would like to talk about how this work appeared. Here, I could, I think, lay bare at least 3 layers. The title of the piece is Fatality, as you have read, and I borrow it from Mortal Kombat, where it means the option of murdering your enemy. Here I use paraphrasing. I turn to one of the most difficult clinical psychotic condition of a human being, when the space around a human being is dissected in 2D flat spaces, and it is very often diagnosed as a symptom of an upcoming psychosis. All the texts you heard were voiced by machines, but the texts are monologues of people who find themselves in an acute stage of psychosis. They are people with different backgrounds, really different people, from very different eras, starting with 1960s and finishing with today. So the text are documentary pieces. I was trying to combine these texts, these monologues, these autobiographic pieces with the current technology of photogrammetry. Nowadays, it is used quite widely to provide for 3D structures. And in this case, I work with landscapes specifically. When I connect monologues of different individuals with long shots of landscapes, I took the original material, the raw material, from the train window while going by train in Russia. So initially, these were the Russian landscapes. And I translate these specific landscapes into the universal. I go beyond a specific landscape or a specific individual and his or her experience to something more universal. And one more thing to say, in Russia, and I think not only in Russia, but in other countries too, there used to be a cult of fools. Fools are people that can afford to say things that other people can't dare to say, and they used to be taken by the medieval society as prophets. Normally, their speech is broken, their speech is not logically constructed. I think that Nostradamus is one of such cases too. In our today's world, neural networks are trying to generate some meaningful texts, and we can see that this idea of prediction is being projected on machines. And I was wondering about this quality of trust. I think trust is an important component of this piece, of this work. And it also seemed to me that when I combine all of these elements and when I increase the scale, I can also afford to take a stance in the relationship with the current political situation in our country. One more important thing to say, which I think has to be highlighted, I wanted to create a new dramaturgical possibility, which I didn't fully succeed in. So, the horizontal axis is stretched over thousands of kilometers. It's a kind of a theatrical stage, which is on the move all the time. And the timeline is much more stretched than all the other axes we are working with. And I thought it could lead to a new narrative, which is not only tied to time. So I think this is it. This is it. Yeah, and maybe just to sum up my words, I think that this work here, technically, I work with projectors, and all of the components are technically synchronized with each other. And I think that technically these works are similar to Tabor's works, but I was trying to dismantle the overall scheme, going from something regular to something more psychotic. And this is a very important link for me, a very important connection for me. This is it, I think. Thank you. I'm also very curious about the research for new narrative, a kind of a new narrative that can be built with new technologies, which are available to us now. And what I also find interesting is the hardware facilities that enable us to do so. This is kind of new materiality, which is embodied in metal, which is calculating for us. And I think it's a huge topic for Tabor too, and also one of his points of interest. So Tabor, if that's okay with you, I would like to pass the mic over to you. And maybe you would like to share a couple of works of yours and to say a couple of words about them.
Hi, yes, thank you. Such a pleasure to be here today. My name's Tabor Robak. I'm an American artist living in New York City. I specialize in digital tools, and I've been working on the computer since I was very young. I grew up with early versions of Photoshop, and over the years I taught myself the new tools. And in the past, for the past stretch of my artistic career, I've been really interested in programming and digital simulations. One particular thread in my work that I'm going to focus on today is simulations that are inspired by nature. And it's not so much that I am inspired to recreate nature precisely, but I look to make an impression of nature in a way. So the first work I'd like to show you was prepared for a collaboration between Rhizome and Hyundai, which Michael mentioned earlier. I'm going to share my screen and show you. Let's see, here we go. So this is the work Butterfly Room Special Edition, installed on the outside of Hyundai Motorstudio Seoul. Here it is inside in Beijing, and again in Beijing. And this piece takes inspiration by some of the smallest life forms in nature, like amoebas and cells, and I kind of reproduced them on a massive scale. This piece once took a different type of form where they were actually reproduced on a very small scale, and you can see them all at once. Here you can see that each one is running on a small Raspberry Pi-based computer with 100 tiny screens and all the wires. And Alex, you can go ahead and play the first video. Let me stop my screen sharing here. There you go.
Пока что, кажется, видим какой-то...
So all we see now is a frozen screen. So all we can see now is the kind of interface of a player.
Okay, so now you can see it a little bit better. So you can see here that, as I said, I've taken inspiration by the sort of smallest building blocks of life and nature, and I've reproduced this here in 3D by working with the smallest building blocks of 3D modeling. So there's a real focus here on primitive geometry and simple shapes and the simplest types of movement. And I found that by combining these and, just the most direct method, it very naturally ended up kind of mimicking the nature of, the tiny life forms you might see under a microscope. Would you like me to try sharing my screen?
I guess you could share your screen as far as I understand.
Yeah. Let's see here. So here we'll be able to see the 100 little creatures in simpler or a more direct way. With these few here, you can see that I'm playing with the simplest 3D element, which is a path, basically a line. And I've cloned spheres along this line and applied a simple algorithm to modulate the size of the sphere over time. Again, very simple creations with metaballs and random movement. Skip forward a little bit. This type of creation right here is one that I'm really fond of, where I've located all the axes on the geometry, which I'll show you over here. You can see here, each one of these little spots on the cube is a vertex. And, it doesn't get any simpler, in 3D modeling than this. And then I've, used this little cloner module to attach cylinders to each vertex. And then I've used this little formula module to modulate the geometry of the cube. And, it's just with these few simple, pieces that we've already kind of created something that looks like a sea urchin. And I just find it's really pleasing how simple and direct and natural that is. And so for the special edition, which we've shown in Beijing and Seoul, these creatures have become life-size. This is an 8K video rendering. So, it's a huge file. This is a 45-minute video. And each one of these little creatures kind of floats in and out of the screen in a very, soft and methodical way. And I've taken a lot of inspiration by, the look of the aesthetic of an image taken from a microscope. So the next work that I'll show you really quick is called North Star. Piece has audio, but I'm going to mute it really quick. So North Star is another nature-inspired piece. And this piece was inspired by a horseback ride that I rode a horse and I was inspired by it. And so I've tried to model in the game engine Unity the sort of natural motion of the rocking back and forward of walking through the forest or riding a horse. I'm going to switch over to a slightly larger version of this video. So when the software launches, you're able to enter the location, the latitude, and the longitude of where the video is being played, so that once the video starts, it's not a video, it's a simulation. Once the simulation starts, the sunlight and the time of day are matched to the specific spot on Earth where it's being shown. This piece goes on infinitely, and all the trees and grass and the different dirt texture and the flowers, they all kind of appear right before your eyes. If you look really closely, you can see them growing. In order to create this infinite space and not have the computer crash, because in a video game, you can't have infinite geometry, it just won't run. I created a little program that sort of plants seeds along the horizon. I made a little drawing here. You can see this is a top-down view of the camera that's moving through the forest. Here's the big trees. And at the very end of the horizon line, tiny little seeds of trees are being planted. And then as the camera moves closer towards them, the trees grow bigger. Let's see if we can see it in the video. If you look way out here on the horizon line, you'll see that the plants that end up being large in the foreground start out really small and they grow before you can see them growing. See, like this tree right here. And so it's kind of a little illusion, a little, just a little magic trick in a way to make it look infinite. But again, I think it's really cool, just the nature of I'm using the idea of planting a seed and growing it to inform my programming decisions. The final piece I want to show you is called Tide Pool, and it's very different aesthetically. Tide Pool is inspired by the way the sand moves when the water rushes over it at the beach. What you see in this simulation are these sort of large painterly streaks with this distortion pulling on them, to the left and to the right. These painterly streaks are actually 3D models of seagulls that fly across the canvas and use a simple bird flocking algorithm. To explain this better, I'll go back to my drawing here. You can see here that this is like one of the seagulls. Here's 3 seagulls. As they fly across the screen, they leave trails of color behind them. But these trails of color remain on the screen. So you can see the bird right here, kind of. And then the distortion shader that I've written kind of tears at the screen, pulls it this way and that way. And it's just something I developed through experimentation. And again, this is another time where I found that, just through experimenting and using sort of the most basic elements of the game development software and programming, I'm able to kind of achieve effects that mimic, very simple phenomena of nature. Since this is a simulation, this is another piece that goes on forever. And I find that that gives things a really nice quality, because there's no beginning and there's no end. You just kind of watch it for however you want. It's almost like, I feel like something that's infinitely long might as well just be, it's very similar to a painting in that way. So like a painting is infinitely still and this goes on forever, and you can enter and leave it at any point. So those were the 3 pieces I wanted to share with you today. I've also taken a lot of inspiration from the video games I've played, and I think this is probably something we'll discuss further along in the conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that, Tabor. It's so interesting to hear a little bit about the process behind these works. I think when we encounter them in the gallery, they come to us as these kind of almost hermetically sealed things where it becomes, I think a big part of the pleasure of artwork is understanding the agency of the people and tools that kind of shape the work itself. But what was interesting in both of your discussions was, I think, this interest in, in manipulating parameters of space and time as part of making, works that revolve around simulation as a practice. In our previous conversation on Monday with Sarah Kuhlman and Theo Triantafilidis, we had a really interesting discussion about simulation and its relationship with representation. Because, if you consider representation to be more like a form of mimesis, of trying to make an image of the world, simulation, as when it's used as a term, is more like building a model that can kind of produce an outcome. It might produce an unpredictable outcome in a computer simulation where parameters can change and different random variables can be introduced and so forth. So there's this element of liveness that I think is something that we associate with simulation, or of uncertainty or generative outcomes. I was curious, something that I'd like to hear a bit more about, especially from you, Mikhail, is when you use generative aspects of the work, and also this is also true of you, Tabor, because I think coming into this conversation, I maybe had a distinction in my mind between works that are, kind of developed in a 3D modeling program and then rendered as a flat video, versus works that are generative, that have variables that can change in a live system that is executed maybe in a gallery space or on a user's computer. I think after seeing your discussions, I kind of want to modify that binary opposition that I had set up in my own mind, because thinking about your work, Tabor, there's this interesting way in which there is an aspect of computation already in the modeling process. And even when the outcome is a rendering, that particular rendering, is just sort of offering like a kind of print of one of the examples of the way in which this system could have kind of evolved. So I think my question is really, when you work as an artist with these systems, do you feel there's a really big shift between working on a live generative system versus developing a kind of rendered work that runs in a more linear way? Or are the two kind of actually quite continuous? What new possibilities does it introduce when you work with live simulation as opposed to rendered simulation?
To me, the biggest difference is a trade-off between visual fidelity and random possibility. Those are the two big strengths. For example, in the Butterfly Room Special Edition, the scale at which it's displayed, the level of detail, and the sort of the blurry depth of field effects, all that was gained by making it a baked video, a rendered video. Whereas in the procedurally generated works, the simulations, you can't necessarily render something at 8K in real time, and you can't necessarily have that same level of, that kind of smooth, foggy effect because it has to run in real time. But what you gain in the trade-off is the fact that you open up the work to random possibilities. And I've always found that, with random possibilities, you can sometimes achieve better compositions or, really special moments that you may not be able to achieve if you had sought out to, to do it intentionally.
Yeah, I think when there's a live element in a computational system, it does introduce that element of the system performing in a sense. And I was really struck by your use of that concept in thinking about your work, Mikhail, because I think all of the video that we saw, that was all video recording of work that would be normally encountered in more of a live system. Is that correct? And when you use that kind of live simulation in the work, do you feel that there's something in that performance that gets you closer to that sense of trying to model, in a sense, a psychological state of psychosis? Or to evoke that state, let's say.
Я совершенно согласен.
Michael, I agree with you absolutely that with each level of introducing new elements to the system, we get results that are more and more unpredictable. And you can add the render, the non-real-time one. You can add that to the system, to the render system, and then you have the simulation in real life, and then you can add the multiplayer simulation, integrating several actors, including people. And these three elements, each of them add more and more complexity to the system. And I guess it takes it to a new level of complexity every time. And every time, going from render to the multiplayer, and in between you could have the real-time simulation. Well, choosing out of these three, we should always keep in mind, like, to what extent do we need this unexpected element, or do we want it to be predictable? This is the artistic guidelines for choice for me. The work that I showed you, these were renders. That's what I was trying to address. I was looking for a new narrative, looking at the polyscreen structure, these long landscapes. I thought I wasn't ready to add this element of real-time simulation or a multiplayer.
Мне, наверное, и интересно здесь еще
Because I guess it would be interesting to build on that and add in this idea that production, like artistic creation, which is based on an algorithm. On the one hand, it's targeting something indefinite. You can indefinitely generate these environments and objects. And in Tabor's works that he just showed us, we saw some examples of, well, to me, somebody who is a lover to walk around woods, it's like a horror story. You're going into the woods and you know that you're never going to meet a spot that you've seen before. It's frightening in a way. And on the other hand, you're targeting, well, there's something infinite. And then there's this idea of creating a catalog that you can always create a catalog of the various outputs, like in the butterfly room work, where all of these organisms are becoming like a set of characters. And it reminded me, by the way, this in game of life, intensified, amplified, like the cellular automaton in a new emanation, if you will. And it would be interesting to get some feedback from Mikhail on this, because in your work, the tool, you're talking about this indefinite generation on the one hand, and creating a catalog on the other, and this accumulation of language and images. This opportunity to systematize and multiply indefinitely with a lot of randomness as well. Mikhail, well, I don't know. I can't agree with you. I'm not going to say that I see a correlation between what Tabor does and my work, the tool. There are some parallels, but I wouldn't say it's as intense as it might seem on the surface. I guess I can give you a bit more detail about the work, and then you can decide for yourselves. Let me first start by showing an intro video, and then I'll launch the program itself. And as I launch the program, I will try to keep my mic open.
Вот это видео, оно небольшое, просто...
That's the video. It's a very short one. Can you hear me now?
Вот, но, то есть здесь,
So,
несмотря на кажущуюся хаотическую,
despite this seeming chaos
я
of
попытался
movement,
симулировать вообще
I tried to simulate the possibility of translating a sign into a text.
не знаю, художник все время
An artist, I think,
на тему того,
is always
насколько он может
worried about the extent to which they can work with a text rather than an image. And I try to resolve this for myself with this work.
например, когда мы сейчас можем рассматривать все вещи,
Now we can consider all of the items that are on one of the
латуровскому парламенту вещей.
horizon, and I mentally split the space of the game into 4 different objects that include all of the objects of the world, 4 groups: plants, animals, man-made objects, and non-living objects. The non-living objects would include planets, viruses. The man-made objects include planes. Plants include mushrooms.
Когда мы получаем набор этих разных объектов на одной
When we get a
горизонтали,
set of these objects on one horizontal line, they become equal in the rights. And by creating named assets from these objects, we start to complicate. We set on a journey to give them names.
нижний экран, например, создавая какую-то комбинацию, возможно, неосознанную, и
And by perhaps unconsciously creating various combinations and encapsulating them. the game then asks you to save it in 3 different states, the content and the fetus, and these are the 3 different states that lead to birth of a concept.
По комбинации мы в итоге получим общий некий какой-то мета-ассет, мета-тул.
And this leads us to create a meta tool, a meta asset.
В этой моей системе такой как бы какой-то аддитивной эпистемологии.
And then this my additive epistemology, the way I called it, so we can then name this asset any name, like whatever.
Теперь созданным и заключенным
Having been created and encapsulated in a text, in a word, it's being packaged, and we have this seeming naming that occurs. And by naming these random objects combined with the word tool, we cannot, it's like we're not explaining the meaning of the word, but essentially the word itself does not always signify, or practically never signifies, what it means. And then only a chain of words can create some kind of conscious textual message. In this game, you have the opportunity to send these assets made of one word or multiple words. And you can receive assets that were created by someone else, by other users of the game. This is the PC version. There's also a mobile version.
желание создать новую цепочку именованных.
You can always create a new chain.
И если вот, Никита, ты говоришь, что это могло бы быть похоже на такие довольно замкнутые формы жизни.
Nikita, you said it resembles tribal lifestyle. Well, I'm not sure. You said it's similar to what Tabor was doing. These are geometric, primitive units. This is very interesting, and it's very close to media art.
Yeah,
I'm going to stop at this.
I definitely buy your argument that there's a distinction between your practices in this area. I mean, it's so interesting to see the kind of, the focus on there's sort of like a monstrosity, a monstrousness about combining all these categorically incompatible objects together. And in a way, it's interesting because it's sort of like you could think of it outside of the computer as just an experiment in combining epistemological concepts that don't belong together and see what gets produced. But on some level, I would suggest that it's the computer that allows that kind of combination to happen. Like there is some sort of fundamental computational logic about being able to synthesize elements that don't belong together into some sort of unit and to apply language to that. It sort of reminds me of experiments that artists are doing with machine learning, where they create a description of a picture and allow GPT, what GPT are we on? GPT-3 or 4? I've forgotten, to generate an image based on the description, and using its kind of statistical understanding of how images are understood by humans. So I think that that kind of suggests a line of inquiry that I think is sort of relevant, which is, maybe I have a question that might take us in a new direction. I wonder, Tabor, if you have any response to jump in, or if I should continue on there.
Нет, все.
Michael, well, that was all for me. I agree with what you're saying.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I think one of my interests with World on a Wire has been in sort of thinking about how the use of quote unquote nature as topic in many cases for artists working digitally. I almost feel that it's a kind of a stand-in or a way of taking like the default thing that gets simulated in order to think about simulation. So with the game of life, John Conway developed the cellular automata that, followed a simple set of rules and seemed to appear living. And many of the kind of famous algorithms that we know, like Boyd's birds, the flocking algorithms and so forth, these things are kind of so fundamental to computation itself that it becomes difficult to understand what computation would be without the effort to model nature. So modeling nature, I feel on some level is so central to what computation even is, that when you take on the project of modeling nature, you are in some way thinking philosophically about or asking philosophical questions about computation. And I think that's where I would draw a point of connection and departure between the work that you showed, and I think where Tabor has kind of brought us up to in the kind of very brief survey of his practice. I wonder if there's a work that suggests itself to you, Tabor, that we should look at in response to some of those ideas. I was thinking a little bit about your rocks project that you did when I was looking at the thinking about these kind of strange tool sets that are appearing in Mikhail's piece.
Yeah, for sure. I did a project where I modeled 120 or something rocks, just like little pebbles. It's not too unlike this butterfly room in a way. But yeah, it was another piece where it was fun to try to kind of like invent something, and try to use certain limitations so that the rocks aren't completely like based in fantasy, yet also are not, just duplicates of rocks that exist. It's just a very small, it's a very small pursuit, what I was going for, It's kind of a fruitless procedure in a way.
Yeah, but it's such a good subject matter because the rock is like this kind of very fundamental tool. And but I think that the work that you ended up with is quite aesthetically appealing. It's like a little bit unsettling, but more on the side of a kind of harmonious representation of this idea of a synthetic rock. And I guess I wanted to put that on the table as a point of discussion, like, Mikhail, in some way, is it your intention to bring out a disharmony in computational systems? And Tabor, conversely, are you particularly interested in creating a harmonious experience of synthesis, and to what end? To what extent are you interested in that, the kind of synthetic harmony that can result from these unusual forms that you create and systems that you create? Or is your emphasis a little bit more on trying to create a more subtle, unsettling sort of feeling? Not that you can predict exactly how people will encounter the work.
Yeah, so the simulation of nature is one of the main threads.
Когда я впервые познакомился в детстве с компьютером,
When I first got to see the first computer in my childhood, and then I got to know 3D graphics, and later on, an opinion got crystallized for me that most probably this is the most closed, so to speak, to in the world. It could be similar to the cubes that nuclear physicists work in, the cubes which are leak-proof, airproof, in where one can conduct experiments. And I thought that the same was true for computers. It was a kind of a sealed cube where I could conduct experiments. And this thought really inspired me for quite a long time. As for now, I can't really formulate what is happening in my practice, but I think that this idea of fully sealed space or fully hermetic space is less true for me. And I think that now everything is a bit different for me.
You mean less true than
There is digital, sorry.
you mean less true than it used to be? Less true for you than what? Maybe
Да,
it's
менее правдиво. Yes, чем раньше, да. Ну,
Yeah, less true for me than it used to be for me in my practice. I think that there is no such thing as a pure experiment in the computer. I don't think it's possible anymore. But anyway, I think that computing experiments are very important also for humanity, as they allow for more understanding of the world around us.
Yeah, I think trying to create experiences of harmony or disharmony or unsettling or uncanny could have, quite profound implications on a political review of what's happening with technology and society as a whole. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd welcome comment on that, or we could also talk about your.
Yeah, I like what Mikhail said, that there's no pure experiment on the computer. And I find that this is true all the time. The simulation of nature is one of the main kind of threads in my work. And lots of times I am just kind of pursuing it for the sake of it, the visual pleasure of it, but also in order to create this sort of soothing effect that's relaxing and peaceful and sort of an antidote to, the pressures of capitalism, basically, which is the second thread in my work. My work is either peaceful about nature or it's more about, the oppressive lens of capitalism. But so regarding what you said, that there's no pure experiment, I think that's true. Even in my peaceful nature-based work, there is this, the statement that the material itself makes, whether it's a huge LED wall, burning with all that heat, or it's like the pixelated picture of the beach, you can't help but feel the tension between the natural world, which is, in conflict with, technology and industry and so on.
I've always found it fascinating, Tabor, how you've worked sort of in that really central vein of image making. I know, like the incredible amount of energy you put into computational energy and artistic energy you put into making these works, which I think I always see it as kind of a reflection of the energy that gets poured into video game experiences. And in some way, like, I'm certainly really interested in what's happening in video game culture, but I guess I always am like unsettled by how extreme the production of video games has become. The AAA titles today are just taking up so much time. They're like the great pyramids of our ages, in terms of the amount of human labor that's going into them, and also probably the labor politics involved in that. And like, how does it feel to put yourself in the position of doing that kind of labor also? And how does that relate to your own practice as a person that's worked contiguously to kind of that kind of commercial world in the past?
Well, for me, I find that, I think that humans generate a certain amount of pleasure and purpose through a type of labor, whatever it may be. And we're naturally drawn to, doing things, taking on little projects, whether it's, sharpening a stick or, making a video game, whatever it is. But what I've found that's interesting for me is, as invested as I am in the computer, and and all my ability is located within digital tools, I find that sitting in front of the computer is, for me, one of the least natural things possible. Like the achievement and the creation is really fun, but the physical act of being in the chair and sitting in front of the computer and looking at the bright screen is something that I've recently found to be extremely unpleasant. And this is something I'm kind of negotiating within myself.
I think we all are. Yeah. Maybe that's a good moment actually to speak about. You touched on several times in your intro, Mikhail, the question of trying to evoke a psychotic quality in your work, I think was the word, or yeah, trying to get at like incoherence or irrationality, or maybe I don't know if I'm using these terms precisely, but yeah, can you talk about how you approach evoking that? Is it, how do you try and capture that particular mental state through these works?
Да, дело в том, что я довольно некоторое время.
Sure. The thing is that for quite some time, I was invested in the cinematic industry. I was working on short films, and film production is very closely related to the emotional life of people, and working with affect is one of the biggest components of film industry, I believe. But in most cases, the affect work is very structured there, and it is easily accessible. I mean, there are a lot of trainings on how to write scripts for them to affect people emotionally. So when I work with psychotic states, it is interesting for me as it is also about like presenting one's opinion to the audience. And it's a lot about constructing. It's a lot about immersion. I immerse the audience into my work. When I say audience, I don't divide others from myself. I mean, it's not about some rigid rules. I don't want to act like an exploiter. So it's also about my take on myself. I alternate between sharper edges and softer edges. And as for the terms I use now, they are theatrical in the nature, but the sense is, or the point is that it's all about communicating your point of view to the other, your point of view or your perspective. And as for what this point of view is, it's a different question, and it is more serious one. I'm not sure if it suits our discussion now and whether I'm ready for that question myself now. And since we started speaking about the systems you use that are not fully hermetic or they're not closed in themselves, I remember now Tabor's piece, which is about weaponizing the space, which is about using the effective space. I mean, when we encounter interfaces, when we encounter a video game, which, and here, this is my guess, that the history of computing is also in its origins goes back to military research, and the display is a kind of a device which was made possible because of radars used again in the army. And I was wondering whether you work with these references to the military technologies, to how these technologies can be weaponized. Is it an important reference for you at all?
Я думаю, обоим.
It's a question to you both. Whoever wants to answer. As for this is how I understand your question. So the only thing we can do is trying to see this difference between our practices and other ways of using the same technologies. In Michael's questions and in your questions, I can see how this blurring of the lines can happen. And as for me personally, I'm not sure where we are heading, but I think I can just add the fear of death into our discussion, which is very human, because before that, we've been talking about these questions as something abstract. We were looking at the world like, mathematicians look at their formulas or models. And to show the gap between our practices, I would like to show a short piece with landscape generation, and it will be similar in the technologies to North Star, like Tabor, which we saw at the beginning of our discussion, but it is turned to, I would say, to the more psychotic direction, because it's all about a human being that exists in the bodiless state. Infinite Graveyard is the piece that I want to show now. I recorded 666 minutes of this generated content. I posted on YouTube. This is the longest video one can post on YouTube, possibly. I will show you just a short excerpt from it.
Ну, мне очень, конечно, понравилась идея с введением координат.
I really love the idea of introducing coordinates, which Tabor uses when you can, for example, type the longitude or the particular coordinates of the place and for it to influence the simulation.
Вот, и тут это также простой игровой движок, также простые...
This is again a very simple game engine, and what is growing here is not trees, but some graves. So we can see an endless graveyard. And seasons are changing here. The time of the day is changing, but the graves are always here.
При таких каких-то столкновениях мы сможем найти эту щель.
So maybe it could lead our discussion somewhere now.
Конечно,
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Это игра, конечно, это не как видео.
Of course, it is presented as a game, not as a video, which anyone is welcome to launch on their computer. And again, it's about connecting a human being and nature. Although, of course, there is a lot of speculation here in this game, and it's also very human in its nature.
Да, мне был бы интересен отклик
Tabor, would you like to comment on this topic?
Yeah, I think the military history behind technology is, inextricable from any future potentialities of technology. And I think there's a lot of, conflict between the idea that it's very easy as the end of the line user to perceive all this utopian potential in, technology, the internet, and stuff like this. But the reach to which, from my perception, the reach to which good things can happen from this will always be outpaced by, greater human forces of, the desire to control and desire to, have power over another person. And so, unfortunately, I think that this is that's simply the case. And I've tried to address this in the past with works like Xenix here, which reproduces various scenes of high technology across 7 screens, and it kind of goes through a journey of modeling these digital weapons like what you would find in popular video games, and it juxtaposes that with slice of life imagery like an intelligent smart fridge or online shopping, and here I'm also interfacing with sort of the mythology or the infamy of the phenomenon of white men in America who go on shooting sprees, and the correlation between these games and the people that commit these acts of violence, as well as the media's insistence that there's actually a causation effect between the entertainment and the things that the crimes people commit. And I present it all here as sort of just a salad of ideas, a mixture of ideas, without sort of pointing at any sort of conclusion. I just kind of draw the visual thread between all these mediums.
I think it's definitely the case that online shopping is closely linked to the fear of death, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also, an interesting aspect of it is, I think a big role of technology in the military is, not only to assert dominance, but also to distance the operator from the act of violence.
Mm.
And I think often of the story of John and James Whitney, the early computer animators. The way they began working with computer animation was that they were exploring a California junkyard, and they came across an analog computer that was used to aim anti-aircraft guns during World War II. During World War II. And this was a highly unsuccessful attempt to use an analog computer to kind of plot the trajectory of an airplane. But the way that it worked was that each operator would be responsible for a single variable. So one person would input the height of the airplane. They would make an estimation of the height and put it in. Another would estimate the speed. And then this kind of complicated sequence of gears would move the battery of guns in a certain way, which has a really interesting effect of like distributing the agency of this act of violence of bringing down the airplane. But it was important, the technology was not there. But it was interesting that this really founding moment of computer animation happened because specifically of the reuse of military technology for a different purpose. And I think, I think distancing us from that moment of death, either as perpetrator or victim, does seem like a really central role of all of these technologies that yeah, I somehow see it as much in an image of a fridge as I do of an image of a graveyard in a strange way. I'm not sure exactly why, but the link feels very compelling to me. And I think also like it is, the question of death is very present in video game aesthetics, which, I think people use the video game to kind of dissociate from their surroundings and to dissociate from the body even. To dissociate, you want to kind of leave your body behind in a certain way with, even though you're using different parts of the body, but there is this, you want to kind of merge with that environment in a certain way. But also when you die, you get to come back. And yeah, that's like a central promise of the video game.
И не знаю, хотим ли мы, есть ли у нас, может быть, какие-то...
Nikita, maybe there are some final remarks that we can make. I don't think we don't have any questions from this stream. If we do get them, we'll have time to answer them.
Не знаю, да, говоря о смерти, да, это какая-то...
Talking about death, it's a bit of a dramatic note to end up on, but somehow I went back to the beginning of our discussion when you showed your works. I really liked the fact that they were arranged in a similar fashion. You had this photo of the exposition where you had this simulation offered by the artist. It was an interesting parallel that I noticed. But this reality that was more dead than the simulation or the render or the work that was generated in advance.
Я вспоминаю, например, еще такое...
Mikhail, I'm also thinking about this information going back to this computer that was found, the story. Now to control military drones, the experiment's been carried out in controlling military drones, so with a mental effort. And at this point, technologies are at a stage where controlling the drone requires about 5-6 soldiers. Each one needs to mentally think. One would be responsible for moving the drone up, the other one would be responsible for moving it left, the other one right, and another one for shooting. And together, they are able to control the drone. So it's like a dream at this point, a military dream of the army, where you can work as a single whole. But again, it's a multiplayer simulation in a Call of Duty. In the future, these neural interfaces are not available yet, but they will be, of course.
I think that's an excellent note to end on, to look towards the future, not just about death, which is happening in the future for most of us. But this was a really interesting conversation, and I feel like, there are so many threads that got opened up that I hope to kind of carry with me as we go into our final online conversation in this series next week. Are we meeting on Wednesday next week?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But I should also cite before we go, oh yeah, August 4th, that's Wednesday, right? Yeah. I should cite before I go that the story I told about the Whitney brothers is found in the writing of Zabit Patterson, which is quite interesting for those that are interested. And yeah, this recording will be on YouTube, right, Nikita, for those that want to follow up?
Да, запись будет доступна на обоих языках.
So the recording will be available in both languages.
Great. And then so for the rest of us, please join us Wednesday, August 4th, noon Eastern time and 7 p.m. Moscow time for Timur Sichin and in conversation with Elena Shapovalova and Alisa Smordina. Make sure to see Assuming Distance before it closes Sunday.
Да, и также будем ждать выставку «Мир на проводе»,
The
которая...
World on the Wire exhibition is coming to Moscow in autumn. Don't miss that. Thank you so much to everyone. Was very happy to see you all today.
Thank you, Tabor. Thank you, Mikhail, for the interesting conversation.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Спасибо, да, пока всем.